everyone. My name is Alexa Aguirre, and today I will be going over chapters 33 and 34 of our book, Principles of Economics by Gregory Mankiw. So, chapter 33, aggregate demand and aggregate supply. First, let's do a little overview. So, number one would be three key facts about economic fluctuations, then short run economic fluctuations. Three is the aggregate demand curve, four is the aggregate supply curve, and lastly, two causes of economic fluctuations. So, aggregate demand and aggregate supply. Most years, the production of goods and services rises. For example, in the United States, GDP grows at an average of 3% each year. Sometimes, however, the economy contracts. Firms are not able to sell all the goods and services they have to offer, so they reduce production. When mild, this decline is called a recession, and in more severe cases, it is considered a depression. The economic variables that we're going to study in this chapter are familiar. They include GDP, unemployment, interest rates, and the price level. And also, we're going to be looking at familiar policy instruments such as government spending, taxes, and the money supply. However, what differs from previous chapters in this one is that our goal now is to explain their short run deviations from long run trends. So we're going to focus on the forces that explain economic growth uh, year to year and the fluctuations that occur. For this, we are going to need a new model that we haven't seen before, and it is called the model of aggregate demand and aggregate supply. Okay, so let's go over three key facts about economic fluctuations. Number one is that they are irregular and unpredictable. Economic fluctuations do not come at regular intervals, and this makes them very hard or almost impossible to predict, with their consequences being very hard on firms and households. Number two is that most macroeconomic quantities fluctuate together. Recessions are economy-wide phenomena. There's no such thing as a recession only for consumer spending or a recession only for home sales or auto sales. When a recession occurs, it is shown in many macroeconomic data points. And number three, as output falls, unemployment rises. It's no secret that the output of goods and services is strongly correlated with employment because when a firm decides to reduce production, they will naturally lay off some workers. Moving on, here we have some graphs that show what I just explained. In panel A, we can see real GDP like growth, and the red shaded areas are periods of recession where you can see that GDP has been going down, and you can also see that they do not come at regular periods, like regular intervals. Panel B shows investment spending. Again, you can see how it goes down during periods of recession. And panel C shows the unemployment rate, which goes up during periods of recession, and it goes way up, as a matter of fact. Okay, so let's explain short-run economic fluctuations. We have already seen classical economics in this course, mostly guided by classical dichotomy and money neutrality, which are two related philosophies that basically divide variables into nominal and real variables and have come to the conclusion that the money supply affects nominal variables but not real variables. So in the long run, it doesn't matter what the money supply is, your purchasing power is pretty much going to be the same in the long run. However, in the short run, this is not really the case. Um, Short run economics have nominal and real variables intertwined. And to analyze this behavior, we're going to need a new model. This new model is the model of aggregate demand and aggregate supply. This is the model that most economists use to explain short-run fluctuations in economic activity around its long-run trend. As we can see, it is formed by the aggregate supply curve, which shows us the quantity of goods and services produced by firms at every price point, and the aggregate demand curve, which shows the quantity demanded of goods and services at every price point. There's a couple reasons why the aggregate demand curve might shift. The first one would be changes in consumption. This sort of goes by like the mentality of the population. So if people are suddenly more worried about saving for retirement, then they're going to spend less, and so demand will go down. Like the demand shifts to the left. And if there's like a stock market boom or something like that, people are going to spend way more, so the demand curve is going to shift to the right. So basically, any event that changes how much people want to consume at any given price is something that is going to shift the demand curve, the aggregate demand curve. Another reason would be changes in investment. Literally any event that will encourage people to invest more. Say that Apple launched or Microsoft launched a new line of more effective, faster, smarter computers. And so every office wants to buy them, they will invest more. So this is going to shift the aggregate demand curve to the right. Next up is changes in government purchases. This is a really direct way that the government tries to shift the aggregate demand curve. Let's say, for example, that they start building a lot of highways. This will result in a greater quantity of goods and services that's being demanded, and therefore shifting the aggregate demand curve to the right. And lastly, changes in net exports. This has more to do with what's going on outside of our country rather than inside of it. Let's say that China is going through a recession, or not China, maybe like Spain is going through a recession, so they're buying less things from the United States. Our net exports are going to go down. Or if they're having a war in Europe and they're not purchasing US goods, again, net exports are going to go down. And so demand for goods and services is also going to go down and shift to the left. Next up, we have the aggregate supply curve. As you can see, we have two supply curves. We have a long-run aggregate supply and short-run aggregate supply. Okay, so let's take a look at the long-run aggregate supply curve. As you can see, it is vertical, and it is standing on a point that we call the natural level of output. This is the production of goods and services that an economy achieves in the long run when unemployment is at its normal rate, GDP is at its normal rate. Now, as you can see, the line is vertical. The question, though, is why is it vertical? Well, in the long run, an economy's production of goods and services depends on its supplies of labor, capital, and natural resources, and on the available technology used to turn these factors of production into goods and services. Now, there's a couple of reasons that might shift the long run aggregate supply curve, and these are the same factors that will shift productivity, that will make a change in productivity. Number one is changes in labor. Say that the US faces a big wave of immigrants coming in, and they're all looking for jobs. This will cause a shift to the right in the supply curve because the labor force has expanded. Next, changes in capital. Let's say that an increase in the economy's capital stock increases productivity by 10%. Well, then the effect that this will have on the long run aggregate supply curve is that it will shift by 10% to the right. Simple. Another factor that might shift the long run aggregate supply curve is changes in natural resources. For example, the weather, say really bad weather is going to affect farmers and their production, so that would shift the long run aggregate supply curve to the left. And lastly, changes in technological knowledge. As we know, this is like one of the biggest factors that has the biggest impact both on productivity and on our long run aggregate supply curve. If we have better technology, we can produce more goods and services in a shorter time, then obviously our long run aggregate supply curve will shift to the right. Now, in contrast, let's look at the short run aggregate supply curve. As you can see, it is not vertical, it slopes upward instead. There are three theories that try to explain this, why it slopes upward. The first one is the sticky wage theory, and this is the most accepted one. Basically, it states that wages are sticky, meaning that they remain the same in the short run. However, they do not in the long run. So if price levels go down and your wage is staying the same, then you are wealthier for that short period of time until they adjust. The second one is the sticky price theory, which is similar to this sticky wage theory. It basically says that prices in firms and stuff like that are very slow to adjust to changes in overall price levels. So again, same thing. Lastly, there's the misperceptions theory. This is less widely accepted, but basically it says that firms will likely notice changes in the good that they provide first before they do other goods in the market. So an overall fall in price levels will confuse workers and cause them to produce relatively less because they believe that their prices for the good that they sell has fallen. When in reality, every good has fallen in price. Now, there's a couple reasons